Hey everyone, this is the first video as an introduction to the inverse functions worksheet. And the first thing I want to remind you is what inverse functions are. So inverse functions will undo each other. For example, 5 plus 1 is 6. The inverse of addition, think about what that is. The inverse of addition is subtraction. And that means that we can start with that 6, and instead of adding 1, we can subtract 1. And that will bring us right back to the number that we started with. So we say that addition and subtraction are inverses, they undo each other. And one more example, 2 times 5 is 10. What is the inverse of multiplication? It's division, so you can start with 10 where you ended, and instead of multiplying by 5, you could divide by 5, and that will bring you right back to that number that you started with. So I want to show you this same concept, but with these trig functions. So let's look at sine of 30 degrees. If you're using the unit circle to get the sine of 30 degrees, you would locate what branch are you on, where is 30 degrees, and then the sine, think about if that's the x or the y value. It is the y value, so the sine of 30 degrees is 1/2. And the inverse is going to take the number that you ended with, so 1/2, right? And that little -1 means the inverse. So the inverse of sine is going to take what you ended with, 1/2, and bring you back to the number you started with, which is 30 degrees. And the other thing I want to say is that anytime that you see that inverse, the inverse is always asking, in this case, it would be what angle has a sine of 1/2. The inverse is always asking you for an angle. So I'm going to just repeat that. The inverse sine of 1/2 is asking you what angle has a sine of 1/2. Because we know that sine is the y value, the angle that has a sine or a y value of 1/2 is 30 degrees. And so that's how the inverse is bringing you back to the number you started with, which is 30 degrees. So I'm going to show you about 8 of these, and this is going to prepare you for the first page of that worksheet. So the first one we're going to look at is inverse sine of √3/2. So remember that what I had just said, the inverse is always asking you for an angle. What angle has a sine of √3/2? Okay, I'm not going to write that for each one, but just in the beginning I will. What angle has a sine of √3/2? So think about, is the sine the x or the y value? It is the y value. And if I'm going around the unit circle and I'm looking for where are there y values of √3/2, I see one here, and I also see one here. So both of those angles would be possible answers. And the way that the worksheet kind of norms on this and the convention they follow is they choose the angle that is closest to 0 degrees. So their answer for this one, what angle has a y value of √3/2? What is the inverse sine of √3/2? They're going to go with this one. They're going to say 60 degrees is the answer, just because it's the closest to 0 degrees. And I'll show you a couple examples of that. All right, let's just change my order for a second. Let's do arc cosine of -1/2. So for this one, I wanted to show you that arc notation. That actually means the same thing as inverse cosine. And you'll see that on the worksheet as well. So arc cosine is inverse cosine. The inverse, again, is saying what angle is going to give you a cosine of -1/2. Is is cosine the x or the y value? Cosine is the x value. And so you're looking for what angle has an x value of -1/2. And I see an x value of -1/2 here, and I see an x value of -1/2 here. And so, sorry, I'm going to just look at my notes for 1 second to make sure. I'm giving this answer right. Okay. So in terms of choosing what is closest to 0, I guess those both are. And I'm going to give an item bank for this worksheet too, so you kind of know which one to choose. They have this answer as 120 degrees. You could also list it as negative 120 degrees. Those are kind of equidistant from 0. But they listed that one as 120 degrees. This one is not wrong, although 240 is further around. So I think that's why they picked the 120 degrees. But in some of the examples, they'll also say, like, you could also say negative 120. But again, I'll provide an item bank that's going to kind of clear up which one should I choose if there's more than one answer. Okay, the next one we will look at, so we just did arc cosine. Let's do arc sine of negative 1/2. Okay, so remember that means the same thing as inverse sine. And inverse sine means you are looking for what angle gives you a sine of negative 1/2. Sine, remember, is the y value. So what angle gives you a y value of negative 1/2? And I see that here, and I see that right here. Okay, so in terms of norming on going the closest to 0, you could have, I would say this one is the closest to 0 right here. Think about how many degrees we have moved in that angle that I just drew. If we're going from 0 to here, how many degrees did we just move? That was 30 degrees. So they have the answer as negative 30 degrees. They also wrote that you can call that 330 if you want. So going around to 330 degrees or just calling it negative 30, that we're moving clockwise, that would also get you to this branch. But they're choosing this branch because it's closer to 0. Again, that's the convention. This is not wrong. It's just not the conventional answer because it's not closer to 0. All right, so that is our arc sine example. And then let's do arc sine of 0 next. So number 4, let's do arc sine of 0. Arc sine is the same thing as inverse sine, and then the inverse is saying what angle gives you a sine of 0. Sine is the y value. So what angle has a y value of 0? And I see that happening. You can look to where you see that happening. What angle has a y value of 0? Here and here. And because we're looking for the one closest to 0, I'm going to just say this answer is 0 degrees. Okay, and then the last one in this set, let's do arc cosine of negative 1. Arc cosine is the same as inverse cosine. And remember, the inverse is saying what angle will give me a cosine of negative 1. Cosine is the x or the y value. Cosine is the x value. So this question is asking you, at what angle do you have an x value of negative 1? And think about where you see an x value of negative 1. That is only happening here. So we can give that answer as 180 degrees. So that would be for arc cosine of negative 1. All right, the last thing we're going to see, and I'll show you 4 examples because these are a little bit trickier, is going to be inverse tangent. So I want to start by just finding the tangent of each of these. So let's do the tangent at 30 degrees. Do you remember the formula for tangent? It's y over x. So you have the y value over the x value. Remember that division bar? So 1/2 divided by √3/2. So this is a division bar, but it means the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So the tangent of 30 is 1 over root 3. You might also see that rationalized. So if you rationalize and multiply by root 3 over root 3, you get root 3 over root 3 times root 3 is root 9, or you can just write it as root 3 over 3. So that would be the tangent of 30. Let's look at the tangent of 45. Again, the formula for tangent is y over x. So the y value over the x value, that's just a number divided by the exact same thing. So you would get 1. If you were writing it out as division, which is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal, everything cancels, you also get 1. I would encourage you to see root 2 over 2 and root 2 over 2 are the same number. So dividing them, you can just jump to 1. And then the very last one, let me see if I can put a page in here. The very last one is the tangent at 60 degrees. So the tangent at 60 degrees, again, y divided by x. You have the y value divided by the x value. Division is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal, and you get root 3. So those are a little bit tougher to see. So I wanted to just go through those, and we can come back to that as a reference. So let's look at some of these. Let's see, we're on number 5. So inverse tangent of the square root of 3. Tangent, the formula is y over x. So you would be thinking about what y value divided by what x value is going to leave you with root 3. And I think 2 things. Either 1, we did this already, and we know that we got root 3 when we were at 60 degrees, right? We just did that work. If you are trying to do mental math and really visualize this, you would be looking at these coordinates and either writing it out or thinking, let me not put an equal sign there, I'll just do this work off to the side. Is the y value divided by the x value going to give you root 3? And it does, and maybe you're even jumping away from that. Maybe you're even just doing y, and instead of dividing by x, you're going right to multiplying by the reciprocal, and you can visualize that root 3. So inverse tangent of root 3, what angle gives you a tangent of root 3? You would say 60 degrees, right? And again, we're choosing the one that is closest to 0. The next one we'll look at is going to be number 6, so inverse tangent of root 3 over 3. So again, the 2 thoughts. One is we did this already. We got root 3 over 3 when we took the tangent at 30 degrees. So if you want to just use that as your kind of reference and guide, I think that's fine. I think this is a tricky one because the y divided by the x, or multiplying by the reciprocal, it gives you 1 over root 3, which doesn't match that until you rationalize. So this is why I saved this one for the end. I just think they have a lot more thought than just looking on the unit circle and choosing your answer. So 30 degrees for that one. And then the last 2, so let's go number 7. Number 7 is arctan of negative root 3. So we know that we got root 3 at 60 degrees, right? We got root 3 at 60 degrees. And so if we're using that as our reference, here's 60, and it's going to be connected to all of these other coordinates. So where are you going to get a negative root 3? Remember that tangent, arctan, inverse tan. The formula for tangent is y over x. So this is asking you at what angle do you have a y over x of negative root 3? And I think that's going to happen here and here, right? Notice those are the same coordinates, 1/2 and root 3 over 2, just the signs are different. So if we take the y divided by the x, or multiply by the reciprocal, we get negative root 3. The one that is closest to 0 degrees Think about that. Is it going to be going clockwise or counterclockwise? I would say it would be right here at 300. It's going to be the closest one to 0 because you're just going 3 branches as opposed to moving a whole quadrant and then another branch. So I would say that one would be great to list as either 300 degrees, or if you are just moving and you want to use a negative angle, this is -30, -60. So either one of those answers would be great, 300 or -60. And the very, very last one, did I get my numbering different here? Let's see, 1, 2, 3. I think I messed up my numbering, and I think those are all the examples that I wanted to show you. Yeah, because I did 5 there, and then I called that 5. So those are all the examples I wanted to show you. Again, this worksheet will have an item bank to help you know which one to choose. And then I think this is a great reference if you are finding that you're struggling with those inverse tangents, which are tough. This page is a great reference. Let me zoom out one more time so you can see that. Okay, great job.